I asked, Larry if we could be big nerds together. So, we are gonna have a mutual so Larry's gonna teach me, I'm gonna teach him. Nerds in, if you're like a historical nerd, this one's for you. How's that?
That sounds good. That sounds good. Okay, I think I got it. I think I understand what I'm doing now. Wait. So like this, and then if I turn that on. No, wait, that's alerts. Oh wait, this. There we go. There we go. That's doing it. Look, Chad, I'm a pro streamer, okay? There, we got Nick on the screen now. All right.
Neato.
All right, welcome in. Introduce yourself to my chat, maybe.
I can't see you also. Did you want me to see you?
Oh, you can't see me?
No.
Okay, hold on. You should be able to.
I'll introduce myself
Okay,
while
wait,
you
my
do
virtual.
that.
Oh, I know, I know.
I didn't click the start
I
doing
swear I
it
know what I'm
button.
doing.
What's up?
Did that do it?
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay, there we go. Sweet. I swear I know exactly what I'm doing here.
Do not even sweat because I can't figure this shit out either most of the time. I also did knocked on your door.
Oh yeah, yeah.
During the chat if you want to do that too. We don't have to, but
yeah, hold on. Let me see if I can make that happen. There, everybody say hi. We got JFK rotting on the stream. You want to introduce yourself? Did you do that or?
Yeah, I'll do it. My name is JFK. Not my government name. I'm an American. I live outside of Chicago. I got into leftism from my de-radicalization from Zionism to anti-Zionism. I am involved a lot in direct action in Chicago. What else? I like ghosts. My favorite thing about JFK is what his head did that one time.
yeah, yeah. Like that, like the Misfits sing about in that song.
Yeah, right.
Ride, Jackie, ride.
Mm. Do you want to introduce yourself to my folks? I'm sure they already know you.
Sure. I'm Leaping Larry, a Megama streamer from so-called Nova Scotia, Canada. Talk about, communism specifically from like a Marxist-Leninist Juche lens. Constantly ranting at people about how Juche is an ideology worth studying. It's not just Marxism, Leninism applied to Korea or something like this. It's a new philosophy that people should take seriously as like a universal thing. I tend to focus on that a lot. I've been studying that and Marxism, Leninism for the past 10 years now. I've worked in the Korean Friendship Association for a number of those years, along with some other Korean friendship groups and Sangha study groups, and have done online things for a number of years. I organized locally with a party that I don't talk about for obvious reasons, and yeah, so I kind of integrate what I'm reading on stream with what I'm doing in real life. And sometimes I play retro games, and you're perfectly justified to hold that against me, Baldwin.
We love retro gamers. What were you playing?
Well, this morning I was playing Mario World.
Let's go.
I'm always playing something old from the like 80s usually, or
I'm not
90s.
much of a gamer. I feel like I already had performance anxiety that if I'm like playing a game in front of chat, it doesn't happen. But
I'm
respect
actually
to
like
you.
pretty good when I play Mario. I
Yeah.
impress chat with my abilities.
There, he's a jack of all trades. He's a
Yeah,
jack of all
yeah.
trades, chat.
Yeah. And by that, there's three things I specialize in: gaming, juche, canoeing.
So we didn't really have anything except for like we were just gonna yap,
Yeah, I didn't
right?
really plan anything because this was pretty
Yeah,
decided
like
at the last
informal.
minute, more I guess.
Yeah. So I want to teach you and your chat about one of my favorite obsessions, which is Guyana.
All right.
How does that sound?
Yeah, yeah, chat. Press 1 in chat to learn about Guyana.
So, um,
Oh,
gosh,
oh,
okay,
we got a raid. Hold on.
let's go.
Do I not have music that play? Okay, music's not playing with this raid today, I guess. Welcome in, Rob Rouzeau. Great to see
We love
y'all.
Rob.
We've got Rob Rouzeau rating in. Everybody go follow Rob Rouzeau. Fantastic streamer here. Always giving out based information. Fellow Canadian streamer. So can give you a little bit of a Canadian spin on the news. Talk about how even to our nightmarish government, your nightmarish government is scaring the hell out of us. Welcome in, robbers. I've got JFK with me over here. This is JFK rotting.
How's it going, Raiders? We know Rob. We're big Rob fans over here too.
Here you go. You got a 2-for-1 raid today.
Amazing. So,
So JFK here was actually just about to start teaching us about Guyana.
mm-hmm. So I
JFK, the
think
Georgia, yeah, that different that JFK.
yeah, right.
That's why the last name is Rotting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the reason, I guess I'll just start with like why I love learning about like this part of the world. I think it gets overlooked super often because it is, I guess, specifically from like a Western point of view, we rarely think about this part of the world. We think that all of Latin America is just, brown people. There's nothing else going on down there. There's also like cliches about, you know, authoritarian governments who in Latin America supported by the CIA, which that is true. But we don't give any thought to this very specific part of the world. And I think it's interesting. There's like a lot we can learn as leftists in terms of like specifically uh, how socialist governance has been stifled, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
So this Guyana refers to the area at the top of South America. It's actually a couple countries. It's Venezuela, what is now Guyana, formerly British Guyana, Dutch Guyana, now called Suriname, French Guyana, which is a department of France. So if you live in French Guyana, you are a French citizen. So colonialism is alive and well. And then Portuguese Guyana, which is now part of Brazil. And this area was like traded around so many times. Like it passed between hands. Europeans were having all of their wars. So every time that there was a war in Europe, they switched hands back and forth, back and forth. But what ended up happening was the three Guyanas, British Guyana, Dutch, and French, those ones stayed out of Spanish and Portuguese control, which the rest of the area just completely dominated by Spain and Portugal, right? And the big thing there was sugar. So part of the North Atlantic slave trade, this was one of the stops. So people were kidnapped from Africa, shipped across the sea, and they would be made to work on plantations. And specifically in the Guyanas, the crop was sugar. And that is why now one of the dominant ethnic groups in British Guyana, now Guyana, is Afro-Guyanese. Yeah, and so I guess just to like move it, once it became unethical to have slaves, the UK was like, well, we still want sugar and we still want to plunder, you know, plunder the Americas and do heinous, ghoulish shit. So, what are we going to do now? Where are we going to get workers from? Well, they have their Indian, the British Raj, they have their Indian territories. So, they got indentured servants from the British Raj, so Pakistan and India, and shipped them to Guyana. And that's why the second largest ethnic group in Guyana is Indo-Guyanese. So, how wild is that? That in our like backyard, there is a country that is 50-50 descendants of the slave trade and then descendants of indentured servitude from Great Britain.
Yeah.
Um, and I just think that like it's nothing that we ever think about, and that's why I think it's like fascinating. Um, so the British, they started to go through their like decolonization. It became taboo, in fact, to have colonies, but they weren't going to let go of anything easily. All of this was like done kicking and screaming, right? So
Yeah, of
their
course.
Caribbean territories, they achieved independence, but like in name only. So Jamaica got independence, but all of their commerce, all of those dollar bills went straight back to the UK. And British Guyana was paying attention to all this. They wanted not to be, subject to neo-colonialism. They wanted to have like true independence. Okay. So this is when the commies get involved. You know, this is one of many Latin American or South American countries that had a communist leader that was overthrown by CIA bullshit.
Yeah.
So the guy is Chetty Joggin. Here, he's a handsome man. If you want to look it up, or I can like also share my screen.
It'll be easier if I look it up probably like this.
Here, I'll send you his name if you need the spelling, but it is pretty easy to find. Chetty Joggin is of Indo-Guyanese descent, and he studied in the U.S. In the U.S. in Chicago, which is why I have a soft spot. He married a Russian Jewish communist as well. Janet Joggin is a badass in her own right. And he also befriended an Afro-Guyanese socialist by the name of Lyndon Forbes Burnham. You can just do Lyndon Burnham. And they formed. So here's Chetty. He's a handsome lad, chat. I've read all of his books. I'm like very, very interested. I've also read. Burnham didn't write any books, but he did have an autobiography. Very complicated dude. And then, so Lyndon Burnham and Chetty Joggin and Janet Joggin formed the PPP, which is, I forget what that acronym stands for, but it is like the first socialist party in the area. And there was like socialism was a big no-no, and like elections were subverted. There was tampering, but they were incredibly popular because leftist ideas are popular, right?
Yeah.
Incredibly popular, and they went from nothing to having the majority, the People's Progressive Party. Thank you, Levantine. They went from being like a tiny little thing to having the majority of seats in their parliament, like super fast. And Chetty became the premier of British Guyana. The reason why they were so effective is because they appealed to both demographics, right? So Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, there wasn't actually any ethnic tension whatsoever. What happened at the end of slavery was the Afro-Guyanese went from the farms to the cities to find work. And so when Chetty came to power as the premier, most of the Indo-Guyanese were farmers and most of the Afro-Guyanese worked in the cities. And because, they had really great labor policies, they wanted to nationalize the sugar industry. They also wanted to nationalize the bauxite used for, I think it's aluminum manufacturing, something like that. They appealed to all demographics, but this is when the British got like really nervous, right?
Yeah.
They're like, wait, you want to nationalize the sugar? Then like, what are we gonna get out of this? So they called a state of emergency and they disbanded the democratically elected government in British Guyana. They said, nope, you are now directly under the control of it would be like their viceroy. You are directly under the control of the British once again.
Yeah.
And they were like on probation, I suppose. The British demanded that they rehold elections. And once again, Chetty won because he was that goddamn popular. But at this point in time, the British got in the ear of his friend, Lyndon Burnham. And they kind of started, who's the guy? Grima Wormtongue. They started whispering in his ear, like, hey, don't you want to be the socialist leader of Guyana? And he's like, yeah, I actually do. So in the second time, these two guys that were friends, which I find interesting that this happens so often, are now like bitter rivals. And it was on purpose because the British were like, the best way to subjugate the people of Guyana is to stoke racial tension. If we elevate the Afro-Guyanese guy and the popular one is the Indo-Guyanese guy, then suddenly the two major ethnic groups will be at each other's throats. And that is exactly what happened. So like before the British did any bullshit, perfectly fine. After the British did their bullshit, now to this day, by the way, the two political parties, same two political parties, bitter rivals, straight down ethnic lines.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was Burnham lost because Joggin was like that popular. Is this what led to the Esquibo dispute? Yes. So,
the rejection of elections and stuff there, you'll see, is very similar, comrades, to like what we'll talk about with DPRK as well, or I guess South Korea.
And it's so, I think like where I tell people to learn from leaders, but not to there's flaws in these people as well. So my main complaint about Joggin is he was a very I like process kind of a guy, where I think that there were opportunities for him to be a little bit more forceful, maybe dare I say even militant. He kind of balked at that. And in my opinion, that is, one of many things that didn't lead to a successful governance.
Yeah.
So Burnham cried foul, and once again, the results of the election were disputed. At this point in time, Burnham stoked racial tension to the point where there were riots all throughout Guyana, mostly in Georgetown, which is their capital, and it led to some really ugly, violent crimes, which your chat and my chat are familiar with what those sorts of things look like.
Yeah.
And then Chetty and his wife, among the other members of their government, were uh, under house arrest basically for a couple years until another election was held. This time, Burnham did win. Um, he had gotten the support of the labor unions in Guyana. I find this really interesting too, because at this point, Burnham had renounced socialism. He said, "I'm not a commie anymore. I'm a capitalist. Capitalism is dope." And he waffled back and forth on that his entire life, which is very strange, very weird guy, but interesting nonetheless. Um, the labor unions liked Burnham because they were all predominantly Afro Guyanese. Again, like these ethnic uh, uh, differences, whereas the farmers who are all Indo Guyanese, they stuck with Chetty. So what ended up happening was, through some funding by the CIA, go figure, and the British government, um, Burnham won, and he became the first elected president of Guyana. And the next like 30 years, Guyana was, this pseudo socialist country, because even though the Americans and the British helped Burnham win, he almost immediately after winning adopted communism again, and he really resonated with the Black liberation movements in Africa. So he wanted Guyana to be like the African country in South America. So he actually assisted. He sent like a dozen soldiers. It's kind of interesting to like fight in the DRC and fight in Angola and stuff like that. Like he really wanted to form like strong relationships with African liberation. Um, and then he ended up dying later on, at which point Chetty became the president. So Chetty did become president. Then Chetty died, and Janet, his wife, the American Jewish communist woman, also became president of Guyana. Isn't that strange?
Yeah.
So that's sort of like everything like super. I wanted to like keep it kind of tight.
Yeah.
But I want to know like what's your opinion on Chetty. He asked for assistance from like the British military, and he didn't want to I guess he was one of those like non-violent types.
Yeah.
So I want to get like your sort of opinion. What as leftists, what how should we approach I kind of know the answer, but it's a good conversation. How do we approach violence, I suppose, in a revolution?
I mean, so the way I always put it with my chat, I guess it'll be good that what we'll do too is we'll compare him with kind of like, maybe some of your chat doesn't know the history a little bit about like South Korea, because I think there is like an interesting parallel there. But I think like a big framing of it is when you deny revolutionary violence, in a sense you're giving into a dishonest casting of revolutionary violence to begin with, in the sense that the people, the masses, and their leaders are never like wanting violence. We're never advocating violence. We're not advocating for like people to be killed. In fact, we are against adventurism, right? We're against people just going and taking things into their own hands. We want to actually build a mass movement. And that's why we like I said, when someone burns, let's say, a Kimberly Clark warehouse, it's why the response from a Marxist Leninist party tends to be, we understand why this person did that. This is a reflection of somebody, just beginning to realize who their enemy is, although not being class conscious or politically conscious enough to know what to do about their enemy at this point in time: the bourgeoisie, the capitalist, the oppressing class, right? And my thing is, so really, like, the revolutionary violence comes from the oppressors. We build peaceful, like, our whole goal as communist parties is to build peaceful alternatives to institutions that the state is not keeping up their end of the bargain in regards to taking care of people, whether it's like a breakfast program or a hospital, or you know what I mean, like some service that the state isn't taking care of. And it's when you start doing these things and you start organize people towards these efforts, what happens then is the state reacts violently to you, right? And you have one of two choices: either you lie down and take it, or you defend yourself from the violence. And then when the masses defend themselves from violence, that's when it gets framed as, look at how violent these revolutionaries are being.
Right. I think like it's also this distorted version of what we conceptualize violence to be when we don't acknowledge that the exactly the things that you were talking about, like healthcare, um food, housing, all this stuff, depriving citizens of those things should, in my opinion, be considered violence because the people themselves are being harmed physically and emotionally and all this stuff. They're being kept low in such a way, but we never ascribe violence in that way
Yep.
to the state,
Yep.
right?
and 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 I'll just point out quickly, like, DPRK government is exactly aimed at, like, doing everything it can to serve the people, right? That's the entire, everything that the government does in North Korea is focused on serving the people. And that's why, like, you don't see eruptions of, like, violence like you do, in the West. Is because people, like, aren't being, they're not being denied housing, they're not being denied healthcare. Like, to me, that's the biggest measure of a society that is actually democratic, is like those
Mhm.
those features, and a reduction of poverty, the reduction of people living, the increasing of people's living standards, I should say.
So in your opinion, I guess this gets into like my next sort of thought and question. Um it seems like liberal, I'm going to use like capital L liberal. I'm going
Yeah.
to say like liberalism in all peoples, not just liberals. Like reacting to the aesthetics of things. Exactly, like they see like revolutionaries do violence and that's deplorable, but they don't acknowledge the violence done by the state. How, if at all, should we as leftists approach that sort of thinking? Is there a way to like via education, I don't even know, um to explain, or are we just going to have to like build a movement independent of the people who got fooled, I suppose?
You mean in terms of, like, the people who are fooled into doing these adventurous acts, like?
Or just like, they would be like, oh, I side with in this case, Chetty Joggin, but I don't like the cop violence, the violence against the cops. I can't associate myself with a movement where I like the ideas, but right, the narrative has been effectively co-opted to place the onus on the people trying to achieve liberation.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough thing to do. I mean,
Oh yeah.
that's why I think, like, that's why I do think, like, vanguardism is what I do agree with, that you do need to find those elements of the working class, and I mean the masses as a whole, who are politically conscious, right? And then it's the job of those communists who are in vanguard organizations, like And I'm not saying which one or any of those that exist right now because we're trying to figure that out and trying to build that thing. But then it's up to them to participate in these broader coalitions and, as much as possible, draw everybody closer to that understanding. Whether you're working on a peace coalition or whether you're working on, in a church charity group to give food to people or whatever it is. Like, in a communist party, you should be going out to churches, you should be going to peace congress organizations, if you're to whatever friendship organizations that you can, where what
I slipped.
yeah, where people of broad, like, where people of the masses are connecting with revolutionaries. Because the truth of the matter, and this is the hard thing for a lot of people to wrap their head around, the truth of the matter is, most people, when a revolution happens, like even the socialist revolution, to say nothing of the democratic revolution that comes before it, but most people are going to be reactionary. Most people are going to not be communist. They're going to still have reactionary viewpoint. They aren't going to understand the program of socialism necessarily. You're going to have sort of two sections of people, even people who think the revolution's going too fast, too far. And then you'll have another segment of people who will be more messianic and expect the revolution to go faster and go further beyond what is maybe realistically possible. Because at the end of the day, like, what we have to understand is revolution is done by the people for the people. And all that Vanguard can ever do is ideologically guide people. And trying to force them or trying to increase a bureaucratic method of ruling and leading will only divorce the revolution from the people, right? And lead to a situation like what you're talking about in Guyana. Because I think the most important, when we're going to be able to actually educate people on, like, even the subject of revolutionary violence, is when we have achieved a people's government, one where the people have say in the actual policies, right? And therefore an education that is based on a working class ideology. I think that's the key, to have that understanding become broad.
Right. And if you get people to subscribe to that ideology, you know, you're gonna have people who are much more dependable, I would say, as well. If you are able to effectively, convince people, as you're saying, like, guide people, then those converts, or people who weren't, like, politically motivated to begin with, they're going to end up more faithful, I suppose, if you, like, rhetorically, ethically sway them.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, just through the experience of revolution, will gain important education that they won't get otherwise. Just from us trying to explain to people, like, right? Trying to explain to somebody, trying to talk to them, very, very hard to actually get them to change their political position. But somebody's saying something to them, and then years later, something happening that reflects something that somebody else said in a practical experience will have them all of a sudden change their mind and go, oh, now I understand what those commies were talking about, right? And that's why it's so important for us to be in all of these different organizations, whether they're church groups or like in DPRK today, there's parties that are like Chongduist religious parties. There's Social Democrat Party. There's a lawyer party, right? Like, because these communists were working in all of these different groups, and this unity that you see in the DPRK today that they get mistaken as being brainwashed is literally just the outcome of 80 years of a government doing, and the people working in that government doing all they can to serve the people. And thus the government, as a result of that, becoming more and more just a reflection of their own will, right? Of fulfilling whatever policies that they want. But even in DPRK today, you could say that they're probably still many, many generations away from everybody being communist. And that's that's one. I just, one last, before I forget, one last thing, like, that. What's so different about leadership in DPRK is, like, the leader, like Kim Jong-un, has essentially no say other than ideological say, because the entire function of the government is this collective body in legislation, then a separate collective body in the executive power, which is the cabinet, and then another separate body in even the military. And then the party is separate and independent of all that, right? So it's
It's so antithetical to how we build power systems in the West, where we think like, oh, we just take out the leader and the whole thing falls.
yeah.
Meanwhile, exactly what you saw in Iran, if you take out the Ayatollah,
I mean,
there's
even
parallel
Venezuela.
power structure. Yeah, and it's not so top heavy as it
Yeah,
is in the West.
yeah. Well, because and this is why I do kind of harp on this a lot. Like, why the image of Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il and Kim Jong Un is so prevalent there is because it's inspiring to the people. It's really like as simple as that. It's not that they think of them as a god, or that they think that they thought of all of these things all by themselves. Like, they understand that they're working in the party as a collective. When Kim Jong Un comes and give a speech, even when they praise him, they realize that Kim Jong Un isn't like, there's the individual Kim Jong Un, and then there's Kim Jong Un, who's the leader, and he's kind of like the reflection of all the people on the Central Committee, and whatever like conclusions the state has come to themselves. So in a sense, like, he just becomes an image, a human image for people to rally behind, rather than a hammer and sickle in a situation where not everybody is a communist yet, right?
Hmm.
Not everybody's a communist, but everybody looks at Kim Jong Un, yeah, an even greater number of people than are communists look at Kim Jong Un and go, "This guy represents a government and a party that has fought for our interests for 90 years, right?" And that inspires
Mhm.
us.
I think I would wager, and actually I'm sure that like the bulk of what I know about the DPRK is like filtered through this like Orientalist sort of like lens of the West really wants us to think that the people in DPRK are you know brainwashed and backwards, and I don't know. I can't help but think that most of what I have heard is just like racist rhetoric.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it is. Here's like a startling thing to think about, right? But it's true, is that for all of the horror stories we have of all of these atrocities and the public executions and the prison camps and the gulags and all of this shit that we hear, there is no real photographic evidence of anything at all. Anything. The worst you
mhm.
get is photos from the famine, which was a very real famine that happened in the 90s, but was a result of a combination of insidious US sanctioning and embargoing alongside
Mm,
a series of very, very serious natural disasters, including like multiple floods and then a drought and then multiple more floods on top of each other, right? So like,
mm,
no, any country would suffer under that. And then also the right to import wheat and stuff was illegal. And then on top of that, you had CIA agents literally in the country who would go to people and say, if you cut your cow's tail off, we'll give you a bag of rice. And because people are hungry at the time, they want the bag of rice. They cut the tail off the cow, which makes it now unable to work the land, which makes the crop problem even worse, because now
mm,
you have to till the land by hand. Your cow can't do it anymore. They purposely went in buying cow tails to make the food crisis even worse, with the idea that, it will collapse in the next 10 years if we do this. And they tried to get a loan with IMF that was like an equal terms loan, and IMF was
yeah.
like, I don't fucking think so, right? Like, no, you take a loan where we say in the next 5 years that you have to change this part of your society, or you don't take a loan at all. And this is what a lot of people say makes Kim Jong Il the dictator. Was basically, he was the leader when there was this choice of, do we become slaves of the US and maybe we get temporary relief from this famine that we're experiencing, or do we tighten our belts and do we try to develop a self-sufficient food economy in the face of this hardship, while going through this hardship, right? And that's what they did. And that,
So
but
that's like
that's like a reflection, I think, at the popular will from that wasn't something that Kim Jong Il decided and forced on Korea. That was what people wanted to do. They had just fought off US imperialists. They had just fought off Japanese imperialists before that, right? They had lost 20% of their population in bombings from the United States, right? So, like, I think it's not a reflection of Kim Jong il commanding them to do something, but rather him correctly understanding what the people wanted to do, which is not be slaves.
so I got this actually goes into something else that I've been thinking a lot about. Um, right. So the global south, maybe like even maybe countries that you could look at like the DPRK, maybe like Guyana, who they have like an uphill battle of sorts, right? In that if you are I guess I want to know your opinion on non-alignment like historically, but also broadly, um, how can a like emerging new state or government survive and exist if they don't have the backing of like the big dollars from IMF loans from the United States or from something like that? Because in Guyana, their biggest partner was Cuba for very obvious reasons, and because they had economic they had trade deals with Cuba that closed doors immediately and made the non-existent Guyanese revolution nearly impossible.
Yeah,
And Cuba at the time wasn't willing to they were kind of at the ready, but they kind of had their focus elsewhere.
understandably, of course.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that like the most important thing that Iran and DPRK says, and it's not DPRK shows, and of course it's not an easy thing, is that you have to have the Juche principles, what it outlines. Like literally, when DPRK analyzes USSR and says what went wrong there, it's that they didn't implement Juche. And what they mean by that is that they didn't implement a creative adaptation of Marxism Leninism for their ever changing conditions. And instead, Marxism Leninism became something that like was doled out like a catechism, especially in later years of USSR. And so you're learning this theory that was very, very important for gaining the state power of the proletariat. But in this condition where the proletariat has state power, it has very, very little to talk about, right? Like Marx and Engels and Lenin, none of them really talked a lot about socialist society itself because none of them really lived in an established socialist society. And even like something that Stalin talked about was like, we really need to come up with new methods of like economic calculation that is not based on old capitalist methods, because
Hmm.
that's not going to be able to measure how good socialist industries are necessarily doing, because we have to also motivate people ideologically and on like revolutionary terms, not just motivate them with material incentive, for example, right? It like to start to try and
That's a
overcome
difficult
like
balance.
capitalist practices. Yeah, exactly.
That's
And
a really difficult balance because you need that. I mean, I feel like a place like Guyana was almost set up to fail in that respect because, a largely uneducated population. They are mostly like farmers or you know, uh, manufacturers, and they understand labor, but they also believe the promises of at the time the British Crown,
yeah,
and they were very easily duped in that way. So like how do the balance of getting people what they need, while also like radicalizing them, to understand that things could be better and should be better, is like a balancing act, I suppose.
yeah,
I think that in a lot of ways, the United States is having that issue as well, because Americans, they just care about like, how am I going to put food on the table? I don't care about this,
yeah.
theory.
Well, see,
Gross.
and this is what one of my favorite things about what Juche talks about is like the thing that causes a revolution to happen is people's consciousness of independence, as in not necessarily consciousness or being knowledgeable about socialism. Like I say, most people won't be, but the knowledge that somehow their independence, they're either socially, naturally, or whatever ways, is being restricted, right? And this is the reason why, in most cases so far, what has caused revolutionary outbreaks to happen has been like these external factors like war or a country invading and occupying you, because that makes that very, very obvious, right? Whereas in the West, especially with bourgeois individualist ideology that is so prevalent here, people see themselves as their like little islands, right? And they get fooled into thinking they have the independence. What they don't have is that they haven't pulled up their socks and worked hard enough, or they just didn't get lucky enough, or you know what I mean? Like there's all of these false consciousness that arise as a result of it. Uh, that's kind of like, I guess, in a sense, one benefit that like Korea had was that they were a little bit more isolationist in the past. Uh, and the U.S. tried to like penetrate and invade them, and they resisted that a couple times. So they understood like independence wasn't going to come from foreign forces, and then of course they were literally occupied by Japan. So they had this very intimate experience of like losing their state, being a stateless people, and being occupied by Japanese colonialism, which was trying to actively, well, it made Korean names illegal, for example. You had to adapt Japanese names, or you could be killed or jailed for many years. The Korean language became illegal to speak. And, like, I mean, and these were conditions, of course, Kim Il sung was fighting against since he was 10. His father and grandfather fought against these things, right, for a very long time. Which is why we say, like, they come from the people. Like, they fought this struggle against Japanese imperialism, and at first they did it against cultural lines. And the majority, like, progressive forces in Korea, at the time, they even thought that, if we call to the UN, we call to Woodrow Wilson, who was saying about equality for all nations and stuff like that, then he will approve of it. He will condemn Japanese colonialism, right? And of course, the US never did anything like that. And they just essentially wasted their time calling out for their approval. And that was the thing that set like Kim Il sung's father and him apart, was that they were amongst the people, amongst the farmers, amongst the peasantry. I mean, he grew up in a straw hatch his whole life, right? And when he was like 9 years old, his father traveled 25,000 miles to China and took him with him, and started organizing in Manchuria, and taught him like the only way to organize is with other revolutionaries, with other conscious revolutionaries, and find these connections. And then when he was 10, he even traveled 25,000 miles back to Korea by himself as a 10-year-old on trains and foot to stay with his parents again. So yeah, you know, and then as we know,
what a
World War II.
radicalizing experience.
Yeah,
That's
a life-changing experience, right? And I mean, he saw massacres of his own people with his own eyes and stuff like that as a child. So, he's, and even saw some of the like shortcomings, I guess, of the way his father and other revolutionaries were conducting themselves. That's why Juche's thing is like more important than understanding the Marxism-Leninism texts, is understanding the essence of Marxism-Leninism and fighting for the end of all oppression of man by man, and that your first criteria has to be the conditions you're in your own country. That we should study Marxism, Leninism, and stuff, because we can learn a lot about it, but that can't ever be the criteria for what you're doing correct or wrong in your own revolution. Only your own situation can determine that, right? And that's kind of the big difference that like Kim Il sung had. And I mean, Korea, like, I don't know if you know, like I said, they were very closed off. And I don't know if you know, but once Japanese colonialism happened, then of course the World War II broke out, And
Mhm.
as that was coming to an end, really Korea liberated itself before the end of World War II as a result of the efforts of guerrillas led by Kim Il sung himself, right? Like in serious battles, fighting from the mountains of Mount Paktu and fighting out of Manchuria. And he became famous, of course, as a guerrilla fighter in this. And then, as World War II is ending, they basically decided, okay, we need to disarm the Japanese army, of course, in all of these areas. And what we're going to do is two US generals sat in a room and just drew a line on the 38th parallel and said, okay, we will disarm the Japanese army in the south, and the USSR
Mhm.
would disarm the Japanese army in the north. And that's what that
Mhm.
was. Two US generals just drew a line on the map and said, here, 38th parallel. And it wasn't meant to split the country or anything like that. Again, it was just disarmament zones. And so you had USSR come in on one side and the US come in on the other and engage in disarming and help set up a government. Only USSR actually did help them set up a government, help Kim Il sung set up a
Yeah,
government.
they were more economically successful directly after World War II,
Oh,
right?
yeah, yeah,
The
very much so.
DPRK.
Very much so. Um,
I there a white person pastime is drawing lines on a map.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, they
that
love to
is
do
that
that.
is.
Yeah. Yeah, they do love to do that. And I mean, that's actually what you mentioned is one reason why the US dumped so much money into it, right? But be- into South Korea, I mean. But before we get to any of that, like, there was, while this disarmament was happening, you had the People's Councils that Soviets were helping to, they kind of like helped them set up in the North, but they were already there. They really just promoted them.
Mhm.
And these People's Councils were like in the workplaces or on the peasant farms, and this is where people were voting and largely wanting Kim Il sung to be the leader of their country. And these people's councils started being set it up in the South as well, in the U.S. zone of disarming the Japanese imperialists. And the U.S., of course, found this to be absolutely intolerable and said that,
Of course.
with these people councils being set up here in the South, it clearly proves that the Koreans are incapable of leading themselves because look at them, they're going down a communist road, right? So these people are not capable of leading themselves. So what we'll do is we'll bring in Sigmund Rhee, who is trained
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and educated in the U.S.
Absolute ghoul.
Yeah, yeah, just a ghoul. We'll even bring back Japanese collaborators, Japanese landlords,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
literal Japanese officers in some cases, and put them up as government officials. This is the government you'll have. Which, by the way, was a military dictatorship with no elections, not even bourgeois elections, until the late
Yeah.
80s, right? Meanwhile, in DPRK, you had freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, like every fucking liberty you can imagine. They declared equality of women in 1945, equal pay. Women had the right to be elected in and do any job, be elected to any government office, etc. Like all that was established 1945. They were passing the law on like land reform, and this wasn't even the socialist constitution yet. This is just the democratic revolution that's happening, right?
Mhm.
Putting
Mhm.
power in the hands of the people, they were calling it. And like it was causing an enormous growth, right? Like, which in my opinion proves how fast socialism develops. Like even with like USSR, there was a government policy that had to be passed because of the worry of the Nazis. In DPRK, it was
Mhm.
really the people that just they wanted to rebuild, they wanted this land reform policy to succeed, and they wanted to build a new Korea, right? And of course, the US found this intolerable, and they were literally inciting the South to constantly go over the border, do these raids, not capture any territory, but just do terrorist raids into the North.
Yeah. Just try to destabilize, and
Yeah,
then you can
cause
point fingers
exactly.
and say, "Look, it doesn't work.
Yeah,
Socialism doesn't work. We fucked up. Like, we went in there and we did bullshit, and that's why socialism doesn't work."
yeah,
I mean, like the story there is so it's like almost 1-to-1 with North and South Vietnam and and China and Taiwan. Like the United States just cannot help but put a fascist in charge who does untold cruelty, on behalf of the West.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing you got to realize once they set up that government, there's a lot of revolutionary minded people in the South, right? Again, maybe they're not all communists, but they sure are revolutionary. They don't want to be occupied by Japan. Now they're seeing all of these Japanese collaborators come in. There's protests erupting, there's demonstrations erupting. And that's when literal mass murderers begin in the South. And like literally leading people into train tunnels by the thousands and just gunning them the fuck down on charges of entire villages being communists. Like, yeah, Jeju massacre is just one example of that happening, of just US and fascist forces leading people into tunnels and massacring them. And so what you had too was the US was planning this gigantic artillery barrage on a town near the border. A massive one that was gonna probably like wipe out the entire city, right? And they were gonna do this on it was Sunday, so that they could then deny it and say, "Oh, this is just North Korean propaganda." We're a Christian country, right? South Korea wouldn't fire anybody on a Sunday. That's silly. We're Christians. And that was their plan, and North Korea intercepted telegrams of this plan to bombard this city, and so they went over the border and attacked this position. And then because they were greeted like liberators, they kept going. And every town, of course, they were greeted as rightful liberators. And when they pushed them all the way back to the end of the country, that's when the US came in and started carpet bombing them, right? And trying to turn the war around. And then you have China join in what they call the war to protect the homeland and aid Korea. That's what China calls the Korean War.
The Americans and any Western backed peoples, they always so let me get this. They said it clearly can't be us because it was on a Sunday.
Yeah, that's their justification for proving that DPRK was the aggressor on that day and clearly couldn't have been the South. It was the evil commies who would invade on a Sunday, the Sabbath, right? Like that's the narrative essentially that was going on at the time.
That is there is they're similar, to varying degrees the propaganda of in Indonesia when Suharto did his US CIA backed coup and killed as many communists and communist sympathizers in Indonesia as possible. What they said was, these communists, there were women drinking blood of the brave generals and shit like that. So unbelievable that I know Sunday is different than that, but it's interesting that the propaganda spun is just out of this world. So in the Philippines also, the CIA tried to make it look like there was vampire attacks. Did you hear about that ever?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Drain the blood of people in the streets and put little fang marks on them.
Yep.
Fucking wild.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's sinister, what the CIA will do, right? And this is why I always invite people, whenever they try and explain to me what they think is a repressive thing about DPRK, I'm like, explain to me. And then there's a context to it that you can totally understand and probably does not even affect most people's working day lives, right? It does not affect their everyday fucking lives. It's just you being a weirdo looking at the country and seeing whatever, right? And I mean, like you said, right after that, when they started rebuilding, they rebuilt really fast. They, in fact, were sending power to the South because they were generating power and the South was still very, not being developed well. It was way behind in many ways, not to say nothing again of those political ways they were behind. And so you actually have telegrams that I could find if I looked long enough from Kim Il-sung telegramming the South and saying, look, you're 2 months late on your power bill. we're nice communists and everything, but you got to pay your power bill. You know what I mean? Like we can't just generate free power for you. And like so that went on for a while. And
Well, so
then
then I have a question about this too. Is some there was goodwill for the communists in Indonesia as well. They were I think oftentimes, I mean, I want to get your read on this. I think leftists do have much more goodwill than they ought to sometimes, if that's a fair statement to make.
yeah,
Like, what do you think about that?
I mean, yes and no, right? Because I think like for example, I think DPRK understand like let's take the power thing for example, right? They understand that the people are suffering, and they understand that the people in South Korea aren't necessarily approving of their government, and even those that are doing so out of like this coercion and having no other choice. So their idea is that, you know, if and this is China's big thing too, is like if we develop this certain way and if we serve as a model for like how a state should act or how diplomacy or how you should engage with other people, then what we are doing is highlighting the hypocrisy of the empire, because eventually the empire will get into a situation where China wants to do something good for the people, or DPRK government wants to do something good for the people, and that's completely intolerable for the US, right? And it will do everything it can to stop that. Like the long-term like with the US just going to China, for example, right? It seems like outwardly like China's being very, very nice, right? But really, I mean, China just made the US look ridiculous. Like the US didn't have any bargaining chips or anything like that there. And it looked like they said a lot of things, but when you actually like get down to what, like when you look at the actual diplomacy that happened, you realize that, well, what did they get? Trump got an agreement that China would buy 20 jets, right? Like that's all he got. China said, we will buy 20 jets from you over the next 10 years or something stupid, like ridiculous, right? Excuse my language. So like they understand that you can't trust the US, right? So they'll put on a big show, they'll follow along with the decorum and do that thing to show everybody else, hey, look, we're doing the diplomacy thing. But they will think past their rival. And communists, I think, do this on purpose too, in that we think of something in the long term, and the person we're working with, who might be against us in many ways, they're only thinking in the short term. And that's where the communists can use them to their advantage, because we understand, like, working with them in the short term will allow us to get this better position in the long term. And they won't even see that because they're only thinking of things in the short term, right? Now, obviously, that's a delicate balance. And that's why, again, I think it's so important to have a vanguard that understands how you can interact with these broad coalitions, how far our arrangement with them can go, how far along we can work with them, and then when we need to say, nope, this is where we're going to critique them, or this is where we break with them, this is where we oppose them, right? And that's where I think is the difference between what we want, which is unit. When we say we want leftist unity, Marxist Leninist, we're really talking about Marxist Leninist unity, in that those political lines are all the same. But that doesn't mean that we won't work with somebody who, you know, disagrees with us, maybe even in the worst ways in some aspects, like a libertarian, if it means that we can grow an anti-war movement. That doesn't mean that we trust that libertarian, right? It means that we will work with them until like a goal is met, or to improve people's understanding of being against war, and then we'll break with them and say, look, this is where they're wrong. This is their terrible policy on these domestic policies, etc.
Chat's saying that so I do think that you answered like my question. What I'm getting is, my question was like, what do you perceive about, socialists and communists, having to sometimes take a higher ground, and you're recontextualizing it and saying it's more so long-term planning versus the capitalists' reactionary short-term planning.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
and that applies even, I think, in the US, working with
right.
I mean, take whatever examples you want, right?
So I here's another thing. I in Guyana, the capitalist, the Western backed movement was really effective in spreading false propaganda. Was really effective at stoking ethnic tension. Like they even broke out anti-Semitism, which was new to the area. Like Janet Jagan is Jewish, and like the Americans effectively introduced anti-Semitism, saying like, she is like, you know, corrupting Chetty, and they were like used um her old last name Rosenberg, and they like refused to refer to her. Anyway, how, like, as I see it right now, we don't have that same ability to, I don't know, play dirty in that respect, in
Yeah.
that very specific way. Um, how do we as leftists combat, you know, the effectiveness, or not just, how does someone trying to liberate their country, how do they combat, it seems like, an ever-growing pile of bullshit that is stacked up by Western thought or Western back thought?
You mean like I mean,
I think you kind of answered this already in a way.
you mean like a global South country? You're saying how does it combat that?
Oh, this guy, this dude is, that's your like fifth account. Yeah, this person has been telling me that glowworms are eating my relatives who died in the Holocaust. Has been saying it for like weeks now.
Hot girl, what is your problem? Take a long walk, go outside, touch
That's like
some
their
grass.
fifth account. How is the IP ban? What? Doesn't matter.
That's
I'm
what's
sorry, did I-
ridiculous. My wife anyway, I want a new partner. I love Twitch, okay?
Love Twitch. It's the best.
It's the best platform. I wouldn't want to stream anywhere else.
Hot girl.
Yeah, hot girl, of course.
How is that available?
Yeah.
Like, you'd think that would go like
Right?
pretty fast.
Really? None of y'all got hot girl yet. That's incredible. I can't believe that, actually.
Uh,
Somebody's sleeping.
yeah, for real.
Yeah, no,
I'm sorry.
so you're saying how can like a global South country fight against that propaganda wave that the West like employs against it?
Yes.
Like DPRK,
Yes.
let's say.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, it's not easy. And I think for the DPRK, like their thing has always been just, well, as cringe as their propaganda seems to us, especially, before, like, I guess when it had less of a reputation, their thing has always just been show the society, show our policies. They print, like, their constitution, they print their laws for everybody to see on lots of different sites, like, they're actually quite open about all of these things. And in addition to that, they're truthful to their own people, they're truthful outwardly to other people about their positions, and their idea is basically like the US are gonna pile all of this crap on us, right? That's just gonna be the nature of US imperialism. And all we can do is continuously show people the truth, and eventually the lies will become ineffective, right? I think that's kind of like the strategy of China too, because we understand that we don't have that same media power. Like even China, like is well much more developed as it is now compared to the past. It has nothing like the US's global propaganda arm of networks all over the world, and like corporate media thinking that it's independent media but really being part of capitalist state media. Like all of these layers of like anti-communist propaganda that come together to form like this shield that protects capitalism. So yeah, it's not easy, and that's where I do think people like me and you and others come in. We might only be reaching 100 people here on this stream, But those 100 people might talk to 100 other people each, right? In the course of like the next year or whatever. And then those 100 people talk to 100 more. And then that's like slightly dialing up the consciousness of people. And I think you do see that in like, I mean, Francis Fukuyama, he's just recently had an article published in his magazine that was like, DPRK was right to develop nukes, right? The guy who thought history had ended and now we would like move into this peaceful capitalist developmental world is now admitting that DPRK might have been right to develop nukes. And in a reactionary way he's doing it, but it's still proof that, you know, people are like understanding. And like even like more I see more and more people push back against Yeonmi Park's bullshit and stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think Gaza and like the upsurge in the fucking genocidal violence in Gaza has woken up a lot of people up, because you think about the siege and the fucking depravity of violence that was unleashed after that justified resistance struggle by Palestine. What you see from that is like, well, look at images coming out daily. Images, videos, all of these things from one of the tightest blockades to ever be conceived, right? And you're going to tell me that in 90 years of revolution in Korea, we don't have, you know, hundreds of fucking videos and hundreds of photos of like all of these atrocities and public executions and in the gulags and all, like nothing, like what's happening? Are people crossing the border and their phones are just like being deleted? Like are the, like, you know, like a Thanos snap when you cross the border, your photographs just like disintegrate? Like what's going on there, right? It's not how that works. If people are leaving, they're taking photographs and shit with them. That's just the nature of reality, right? Like, it's had an open border with China for many years. That's quite long, quite massive. People come and go, even without the correct permission that maybe they should be getting, right? Like, any country, like, fuck borders and everything, but any country, like, has rules about entering and leaving the country, right? But, I mean, people do cross all the time, and they go to Dedong, and then they come back. And people do it legally and people do it illegally. And it just, you know. But there's not this like big like persecution of people going on. There's not like, because again, and that's why the defector testimony industry exists. That's why they have TV shows in South Korea of defectors telling you all of these horror stories about DPRK. That's why Yeonmi Park exists. That's why all these novels exist, because the evidence doesn't exist. So instead of the evidence, what they're doing is manufacturing consent by having just a flood of anecdotal stories that tell you all of the horrible things that go on. And then what's the most insidious about this is, well, there's a couple things. First of all, if you're a defector, quote unquote, and you wind up in South Korea for any reason, whether you've been trafficked or whether you go there voluntarily, you're immediately put in prison. You're put in a prison called the Freedom Factory. And you will spend as long as South Korea deems necessary in this Freedom Factory. Used to be solitary confinement. Now it's 2 people per cell because so many people fought against the solitary confinement aspect. So until recently, it was just solitary confinement. And you would stay in there and essentially learn how to live under capitalism in this prison called the Freedom Factory.
That's the brainwashing.
Yeah. Like, and when you agree essentially to denounce Kim Il-sung and denounce DPRK, then they'll let you go, but they will give you a certain citizenship. They will monitor you and some people never get a passport. Now, what ends up happening is you have a slight accent because you're from the north. Mm-hmm. While they speak the same language, there is different terminology, slightly, you know, and so you'll face discrimination. You won't be able to find a job. They'll literally keep you out of work. People will know you're from the north and they'll say, no, we're not hiring you. And so what ends up happening now is there's these TV stations and radio stations, and you'll be like, oh, we'll pay $20,000 an hour if somebody will come in and tell us the horror stories of DPRK. And now you can imagine the people, you know, and people want to move for all kinds of reasons. So they'll just go and make shit up because they want to make money. And you can imagine when you're competing with other people to make horror stories about your country, you can imagine how quickly that can run away to babies having to give birth on coal and like their umbilical cords be cut with glass and all this other bullshit because you're competing for the worst horror stories.
You're telling me that the rats don't eat the children, and then the children don't eat the rats? Because that's surprising to me.
Dude, the last Yeonmi Park video I watched on here, she told me that in DPRK there's a secret 5th stage of hunger that nowhere else in the world has experienced, okay? Chat, get ready for this, okay? The secret final stage of hunger, after the stage where your mental capabilities are affected, you come to the stage where actually your butthole opens up and your intestines just fall out. And that's yeah. And she said that she was walking in DPRK one day and there was a man who had reached this stage of hunger and his intestines were out of his ass and he was laying on the ground asking her for food because, of course, he was also at that 4th stage of hunger where he didn't know what was going on. So his intestines were hanging out and he was begging her for food. But she couldn't catch the flies, so she had... she couldn't catch the cockroaches, so she had to eat flies. So she couldn't help them.
What, she couldn't teach... wouldn't it be easier to catch cockroaches than flies?
I don't know. I'm not Yeonmi Park, you know?
Yeah. Clearly, the final stage of capitalism is not imperialism, it's prolapse. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that's... I mean, she unironically said this in her last interview. So, and we were all just sitting there like, wow, okay. The secret anal evacuation stage of hunger.
What an imagination.
Yeah. But, it's funny, but you see what I mean? Like, how insidious this is. Like, this is what passes as, like, the anti-DPRK narrative. And Americans just like, this is what all of your horror stories about DPRK exist on. When in reality, the DPRK's government structure, like, forget about Kim Jong-un for a second, right? Like, he's like I told you before. DPRK's government structure is almost identical to Cuba. You elect your delegates to the highest legislative body in your workplace. They're all subject to recall. You have local government bodies that have much more say. People know like their local politicians' workplace. They know where they live. Like when you have a birthday party, it's likely that your local politician will like knock on your door with like, some cake and flowers and be like, "Happy birthday to your family." Because I mean, like the US, you have like what? 400 people in Congress, 500 people in Congress, and you know how populous the US is. In DPRK's Supreme People's Assembly, that's their highest legislative body in the country, they have now 688 delegates from over the country in a country that's split in two with 30 million people. And that number's growing all the time because the constituencies are based on workplaces and like, where people actually are. You elect somebody in the coal mine you work at or in the forestry mill you work at. So like, you have much more deep connection with your politician and with the political life. And that's why I say like it's an example of a people's government that's being decentralized more and more. What looks like this militant centralization is an outward feature that is like to say to the imperialists, don't you think about fucking with us because we can move as one in an instant. We're all, our military and our people will pick up a gun and fight against you. But internally, like you can see there's varied development. There's, different communities look incredibly different from each other. They have different strategies, different levels of development. And Pyongyang is meant to serve as a model for it. Just like Kim Jong-un is meant to be the model of a communist. That's his entire job, is like an ideological leader. It's like, this is who you model yourself around, just like Pyongyang's meant to be the model that the other places follow. Which gives you a hint as to how much power local governments have.
It seems like, well, I think you would agree with me on this, like to what you said before about it, like it being our job, you and me, other people who speak on stuff like this to, I would say we do have something that the opposition doesn't, which is sexy propaganda. Like their propaganda is lame, and it's backed by, or excuse me, it's bad, and it's backed by, very, you know I don't even know what you would say. Like art that conservatives and reactionaries make is terrible. So we just need to make our ideas as sexy as possible.
Yeah.
And it's not even that hard.
No, I agree. And in addition to being sexy, I will say, like, here's something that, like, actually you saying that makes something come into my mind, which is that, one thing that I know scares people about DPRK is they'll hear speeches like, we all have to unite around the leader's ideas, or we all have to unite around monolithic ideology. And they hear that and go, oh my, that's terribly oppressive, right? Because they don't understand what that means. And I think like what you're talking about here is actually what is actually reflective of this, like, because the reason why our ideology, our working class ideology, our revolutionary ideology, the reason why that can become a monolithic ideology is because what we're really about is the end of all oppression of man by man. That's the essence of it. And so really we fight in we fight in the interest of the broad masses as a whole, right? Like for me, I like that DPRK and Juche in a sense takes the bourgeoisie and the capitalist parasites out of the equation of the masses and says, forget about all of these subcategories of working class and like petty bourgeois and lumpen proletariat and forget about all that. Those categories do exist, right? But that's not so important because people's social origin is important. But because our ideology, our working class ideology, actually champions the interests of anybody from the working masses can readily understand it. Anybody can readily adopt it and be inspired by it and fight for it. And it doesn't mean that we, like I was saying before, it doesn't mean that we look at Marxism, Leninism texts and go, oh, we do exactly what Stalin does. It means that we can learn something from that. But really what we have to know is our own history, our own conditions, and what it means to fight in that direction, right? And that's why I think like it's so important to understand that not only can we be more sexy and aesthetically pleasing, but also just inherently our ideology is about fighting in the interests of the broad masses, which is why they can accept it, because that's what it's nothing more complicated than that. It's like, do you think everybody should have housing and healthcare and all of these human rights? Yes. Then there you go. You agree with the monolithic ideology. You already have the monolithic ideology, right? Like, if you're somebody who thinks that humanity should have the right to food, the right to housing, the right to healthcare, the right to education, and all of those aspects that are guaranteed, the right to political equality, as in we should have the same influence in the government as the people next to us, no matter how much material goods they have, or no matter what their social origin is in society, we should all have the same say, all of these things. If you believe all that, well then, guess what? Congratulations, you already have Kim Il-sung's idea. You just didn't know it yet, right? And that's what gets so distorted by the West, because they hear that and they say, well, look, they're just trying to rally everybody around the scary dictator that they all think is a god, right? But the amazing thing about Kim Il-sung, one reason why I think DPRK is so inspirational is, do you know why he's called the Eternal President?
I do not.
So the reason he's called the Eternal President in DPRK is because he was, first of all, the first president that DPRK ever had, of course, being, they just liberated themselves from Japanese colonialism. He was elected the first president, and he was also the very last president of the DPRK. In that, a president, like in the US, was an office that was the legislative head by veto powers, etc., and emergency powers. He was the executive head, same thing, emergency powers and veto powers, and he was the military head, executive powers and veto powers, much the same as the president in lots of other countries have. by 1994, before he even died, he had divested in the presidency. Like, he was part of a movement that was to abolish the presidency and split it up into those bodies I mentioned before. So it went from having a presidency to having now a Supreme People's Assembly as the legislative body, the cabinet as the executive body, and the National Defense Commission as the military body. And none of them, and getting rid of veto powers and emergency powers altogether, so that the collective had to decide to come together and on any emergency measures. So he essentially became just a martial, like a ceremonial martial leader. And as a result of that, they still called him President Kim Il sung. And then when he died, they said, well, you know what? Since we don't have presidency anymore, we're just going to say Kim Il sung is forever our president, right? He's forever because his ideas still live on. We still rally behind his ideas. So he's our eternal president, President Kim Il sung. And like Kim Jong-un, he's a chairman. Kim Jong-il, he wasn't even in any state organs at all. He had no vote in any state organs. And like when he was leader, even people were like, we want to make a ceremonial head of state position for you. And he refused it and was like, no, that's not necessary. I don't think that's something that majority of Koreans want. And, you know, their support is enough for me. Right? Like, just a whole different way of like organizing the society in a way that, in my opinion, I think most people who call themselves anarchists in the West, honestly, if they could understand what it was, would agree with and would get behind, because it resembles the direct democracy that so many talk about, right? Even libertarians, like I say, like libertarians who don't want taxes. Well, DPRK has no taxes at all because of socialism.
Damn. What do I even have? How about this? How about this? Because I have to pee like really bad.
Yeah.
How about I ask you one more question? I've really enjoyed talking to you, from one nerd to another.
Yeah, for sure. It's been great learning about Guyana. I know a little bit, but definitely not enough.
Yeah, I mean, so things are gonna change. So they recently discovered a massive oil deposit off the coast of Guyana. Like you're gonna see the West try to tear it apart once again, just because of that. Like, they have gone from one of the most impoverished countries. It's soon to be like one of the richest. Just that they found that much oil. But anyway, what are you reading, Larry? What are you reading right now?
Well, right now I'm actually reading multiple books on stream for everybody.
King.
Mondays
Which
we're
one?
reading Internationalism in Practice, which is a collection of Claudia Jones's work. And it also has Gerald Horne, Betsy Yoon, and someone else in it too, I can't remember. On Tuesdays, we read from Kim Jong-il's On the Art of Cinema, which is all about making movies for revolutionaries. On Wednesdays, we read from Kim Il sung's With the Century, which is actually his life story, which I'm learning for the first time. And on Thursdays, we read Stalin's collected works. We're currently on volume 2.
Yeah, I was disappointed that Stalin didn't mention the aliens when I was in your chat. I was like, where are the aliens?
People don't know what
reading...
Stalin writes about, I've come to learn.
Yeah.
They think he wrote about, like, you know, chopping bourgeoisie babies' heads off or something. But he didn't.
Something like that.
He didn't, it turns out.
I have a book club in my community. If comrades want to read together, I find that reading with the homies makes it so much easier. You obviously know that too.
Yeah.
We're reading Psychiatric Hegemony is the new book that we picked out. Marxist Theory of Mental Illness, and It's it's really good so far. I also have been making audiobooks.
Oh,
So I
nice.
just made Blood in My Eye George Jackson
I've
audiobook.
actually read that on stream as well on my YouTube. Cried at the end of it.
He
Bawled like a
he yeah, I mean he just describes killing cops in such detail. I mean, he really has a way with words.
yeah, yeah.
Um
The end gets me. I
and
mean, I think you would really, honestly,
yeah,
I think you would appreciate reading Stalin's. Well, I mean, maybe you've heard lots of it, but like Stalin's Collected Works Volume 2 is amazing too, because you're getting the perspective of a guy active in like stealing and distributing arms to like Muslim revolutionaries and being like exiled to Siberia and writing back to the party from Siberia, fighting against liquidators who were a faction that wanted to get rid of all illegal groups like with the party, you know? That's really cool.
I I find that if chatters are ever like, man, like I don't have the attention span for reading, like totally get that. I was not diagnosed. I was diagnosed with ADHD like way too late in my life,
Yeah.
and I have realized that the way for me to like overcome my ADHD when reading is to read multiple books at once,
Yeah,
and not
same.
like to like read a chapter. Like once you get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm kind of like clocking out, switch to another book,
Yeah.
and then you just keep going. Um,
It's that ADHD
yeah,
life.
it's listen, it's. I wish that I had known. Sometimes I start thinking like, what if I had done school like medicated? What would
Yeah.
that have looked like?
I mean, I tried to medicate it, and I'll tell you, it didn't work for me. So,
Mhm.
grade 10 dropout. So I can tell you, it didn't fucking do a goddamn thing for me.
Hey man,
I can tell you that firsthand. I wish it did. I
I
really wish it would, but like, I don't know. Part of my problem too was like school was felt too colonial or something. So I came to
I can tell you,
I came
I
to a
work
point
with
in my school in
PhDs.
grade 10 where I literally threw my book in the garbage and I went, fuck off, see you later. And I left school and like did drugs for 20 years straight or 10 years straight or
Well, that's
something.
this is what I tell people. Like
I
the
chose
education
drugs.
system is like it is made to churn out a very specific kind of person. Like it is made to churn out a very specific kind of worker, a very specific kind of person. Like I
Yeah.
work with PhDs who they I, you could do laps around them in terms of making a argument,
Yeah. Well,
even just as basic as that.
I mean, what's funny is I've worked like working with this Scrub Books. I worked in there with like a bunch of PhDs and like, political. And I'm like I'm like a grade 10 dropout, so it always felt so weird, but they would always like reassure me, like, trust me, I've had to unpack more shit. Like, half of my thing has been unpacking shit where you're already past me in regards to that. So that always helped because it's like I always felt like the Ricky of the left or something,